The deep resting squat is a position I've talked about on this channel before. In fact, I've made a whole video about it. And to recap on why it's so important, the deep resting squat is a fundamental human movement pattern. That is to say that we all should be able to get into a deep squat and not feel like we're working out, like we can just hang out and rest down there. In fact, this is how many of us would have rested prior to the ubiquity of chairs. It's how we should empty our bowels, how we would eat around a campfire. So for all these reasons, it's clearly something that's important to the general movement and function of the human body. So when you remove that from the equation and find yourself unable to get into that position at all, this can actually have unwanted knock-on effects throughout the rest of the body and the rest of your movement. You're going to find yourself with tight hips, with a tight lower back that's going to round a lot. You'll find it more difficult, of course, to squat a large amount of weight without injury, but you're also more likely to injure yourself whether lunging to the side or moving quickly. And being able to squat deep is actually just useful for a bunch of everyday tasks, whether it's playing with your kids, whether it's picking something up off the floor, whether it's jumping and getting into that amortization phase where you drop down low before springing up high. So being able to get into a deep resting squat is something we should all be aspiring to. And when you fix this, it actually fixes many other problems as well for a lot of people. Now, I talked in the previous video about how to achieve this by simply squatting deep and staying there and holding it for a certain amount of time. But whilst this is still the case, I wanted to elaborate a little bit further because I think I've found methods that are more effective for teaching myself and others how to get into the deep resting squat. And B, I think there's some cues that I may have missed that can help you to prevent injury. A while back, I started experimenting with something I call the liquid motion system, which is just getting into a deeper range of motion and moving around there casually. I found this was transformative for me in the way I approached mobility, so some of these principles can also apply to other mobility goals. For now though, we're going to look at the deep resting squat and see how you can implement this in just a few minutes a day in order to restore this movement pattern and hopefully improve healthy movement in every task that you engage in. So we'll start by looking at how we're often taught to get into a resting squat and then contrast that with this method and show why I think it's more effective, but also going to prevent injury and lead to better biomechanics overall. So to start with, let's say you can't get into a deep resting squat naturally. Get where you can see my feet. You can't do this. That's because you probably lack ankle dorsiflexion. So you can't lift your toes up into the air. You're lacking that mobility. So you end up leaning back. Now what happens is if you try and force yourself into this position, what you're going to do, you're going to be sat back here and you're going to round your back forwards to compensate. And now you look like this gremlin. As you can imagine, that's not ideal for your lower back because you're rounding it both underneath. You've got the tucked tailbone and then also at the top. So it's just quite a high pressure position to put yourself in. You've heard of ego lifting. Well, this is in many ways a bit like ego mobility stretches because you're forcing yourself into a position that clearly isn't quite comfortable for you yet, which is understandable because you want to force that adaptation. But this can actually be what leads to injuries in itself. So we want to take a more gentle approach. At the same time, if this is the movement pattern you're going to learn, now you think you can deep squat, even though you don't actually have the correct ankle mobility, you're going to put a heavy weight on your back and do that position, and you might be fine, but you might also not be. You might also have been told by some people that if you can't get into that resting squat, then what you want to do is hold a very heavy weight in front of you, or alternatively hold on to something to force yourself down deeper into that position. And now this again has merit. It will help you get into that position by being a weighted stretch, and it can be effective. It's been effective for many people, but at the same time it can also be bad advice for some people because what you might find yourself doing is learning that movement pattern. So if you're holding a kettlebell in front of you, and I've recommended this myself, I say it's not a completely worthless idea, it's just something to be aware of depending on your own biomechanics. If you're holding a kettlebell in front of you, then you can compensate by sitting back further because you've got that counterbalance, that being the weight. So you might actually find you're not training your ankle dorsiflexion as much as you think you are, and you might actually be rounding your back more than necessary, and this is allowing you essentially to cheat the movement and then learn that movement pattern. And what you're also doing here, and what you do if you hold on to something as well, is you're pushing and forcing yourself into that position kind of further than you're able to go naturally. And this again can lead to injury. So I've heard some people say that if you want to see progress in your mobility, you need to treat it like bodybuilding. That is, you need to feel the burn. It needs to be uncomfortable. And some people would even describe it as excruciating. I mean, this is how the Shaolin monks do it. This is how the Peking opera do it. But I can't say I think it's a particularly good idea because, like I say, especially if you're not someone who's used to this, if you've got all these other, mobility limitations, all these other compensatory movement patterns, then forcing yourself into a position that's beyond what the body is capable of can lead to injury. So I experienced this myself. As some of you guys know, I've got chronic lower back pain. I get spasms. I'm dealing with it very well at the moment, but it comes and goes. One time I was trying to improve this by improving my hinge, and I did it by doing a pancake stretch weighted, and surprise, surprise, I was actually rounding my back slightly rather than doing a proper hip hinge, and I hurt myself. And, I'm someone who knows about this stuff. How many people do you think are going to try and force themselves into a weighted stretch and potentially cause injury, even if the weighted stretch is good because they're not using proper technique? Now, filming yourself and watching it back is one way to mitigate this, but I think that there are better ways we can stretch, more sensible ways. Now, if you've spent some time around what I would classify as the more useful and helpful side of YouTube, your squat universities, your bodyweight warriors, fitness FAQs, you might have heard that there are other reasons that we can't all easily get into a deep squat position. This has to do with relative proportions. So if you've got very long femurs compared to your torso, for example, really long legs means you're going to have to lean forwards more to get into a deep squat. It might be to do with the depth or the angle of the actual socket that your leg inserts into. This might mean you need to widen your stance. Now, I think that pretty much everybody should be able to get into a deep squat who is healthy. There might obviously be exceptions, but on the whole, we should all be able to do it. But adding weight on top or trying to force perfect form, that can be a mistake depending on you personally and what your goals are. So again, forcing yourself into this position might not be such a good idea. And then there's the other practical aspect to consider, which is that when you force yourself into a deep stretch, your body actually tenses up to prevent that. So the reason that we often lack mobility is not to do with physical limitations of our body, it's more so to do with tension. Your body isn't used to being in that position, and when the muscle lengthens, your nervous system contracts it to prevent that from happening. It's the myotatic stretch response, but in slow motion, preventing you from getting into a range of motion where you lack strength. So if you force yourself as hard as you can into that position, your body's actually going to contract more. And this is going to mean you're fighting your own body to get into that position, again, increasing chances of injury and actually slowing down your progress. The aim instead should be to build strength in those end range positions and essentially to coax your body into them, to tell it that it's safe to get into that position, that you're not going to injure yourself. Holding a big weight over yourself isn't a great way to do this. You want to gently and in a relaxed manner get into those deeper stretches. Being more relaxed in general, breathing properly during the stretch, and maybe not having a massive dose of coffee first thing in the morning can all actually help you with this as well. So the liquid motion system, as I describe it, or just the approach that I recommend, is to not force yourself into deep stretches, but rather to forget a bit about the goal. Gently explore the ranges of motion that our body has available to us, and over time you'll be surprised at how you can unlock them this easily with no discomfort, and that also means you're far more likely to stick to it because, it's not grueling and horrible. So with all that said, this is how I recommend you try improving your squat mobility. And as I say, you can apply these similar principles to really anything. So the first thing you're going to do is go and just attempt to get into a squat. But you're not going to hold the squat, you're just going to go as deep as you can and then stand back up. No pressure to push yourself as far as you can. You're just trying to explore how far you can get. You might find that you're a little bit stiff. If it's the first time you've done this today, if you've not been moving much, if you've been at the office, or if you've been asleep and you've just woken up, then you're going to be a bit stiff. You're going to find you can't go down that far. This is where some people will then force themselves into that position, or they'll just give up entirely. But either of those things would be a mistake in my opinion. What we're going to do instead is just stand back up and then just stand back down, squat back down again a couple of times. And you're going to find that each time you do it, that without even really trying, you're going to get deeper and deeper into the squat. And at the same time, you can shuffle your feet around, try and get them into that comfortable position, so that you're not forcing yourself into a deeper squat, but you're just naturally finding yourself getting deeper as you try. Now here's the thing, as you do that, you might find your heels lift slightly off the floor if you're lacking that ankle mobility. Again, this is where some people will then force themselves down to the position using a weight or just, willing themselves into the position, and this can end up hurting them. What I'm going to again recommend that you do differently here is just allow your heels to come off gently from the floor as much as they need to. So if there's just a small gap between your heel and the floor, that's fine, because what you're doing here is you are doing a weighted stretch. The weight being your body weight, you're applying that small amount of weight to gradually improve your ankle mobility. Instead of trying to force it and get ahead, you're slow and steady winning the race. So just go down there and don't worry about doing perfect form. That said, we do want to focus more on this being an ankle mobility movement, not so much on rounding that back, like I said. You don't want to be tucking the tailbone more than necessary. There's some debate as to whether butt tuck is really as big an issue as some people say it is, or whether it's not. I personally have found that my back's improved a lot since I've been doing that less and allowing myself to stay in a more anterior tilted position. Whatever the case, try and keep your center of gravity over the middle of the foot and allow the heels to come off the floor if necessary to achieve that. The goal being to eventually get the amount of ankle dorsiflexion necessary to get into that position comfortably. You might also need to widen your legs a little bit, so experiment with that. And then eventually you're going to get down into that deeper position. And then of course you're just going to hold that position for about a minute. But again, you're not trying to do this in a forceful manner, and you don't even need to be static. You can bob up and down gently. You can move from side to side, move your weight around, try and find that comfort spot. And like I say, don't force anything. Try and relax the body, try and breathe gently. Doing all of this is going to be enough to improve your mobility, even if that's all you did every day. But if you do that a few times a day, then you're going to see rapid improvements to your mobility, and you're also going to get that acute short-term improvement to your ability so that you're not seizing up from having your legs in that bent seated position all the time and having your back rounded at the top. You're going to be reminding yourself to maintain a proper posture, easing those tight muscles and preventing injury, hopefully. And when you go to the gym later on, you might even find that you need less of a warm-up. I'm not telling you to skip your warm-up, but by moving properly throughout the day, you might find you need less of a warm-up. And one more tip, guys, is to practice this whilst barefoot. If you're just doing it at the gym, or if you're counting your back squat as your squat mobility, well then this isn't going to quite work. That's not only because of the reasons we've discussed, where a weighted stretch isn't always ideal for improving mobility, or because, a back squat you often don't go ass to grass. I mean, you might choose to do that, but not everyone's going to want to, especially if you lack that mobility to begin with. But at the same time, if you're wearing regular trainers, regular shoes, then you're going to be lifting your heel off the floor. And if you're wearing weightlifting shoes, you're going to be lifting your heel off the floor even more. I'm not being down on weightlifting shoes. They have their place. If you want to pile as much weight on your back as possible, then making it as easy to get into a deep squat as possible by using that heel elevation, that's a great thing. And having that extra stability you get from those shoes. However, it's the right tools for the right goals, because if you're doing this, you're not allowing yourself to get into that deep position. You're not allowing your ankle to dorsiflex. This is one of the reasons we can't get into this position in the first place. We walk around all day plantar flexed with our heels off the floor and toes pointing down because we're in these shoes. Especially true if you're a woman and you wear high heels, or if you're a guy and you like that little height boost. I know I used to when I was younger, being 5'8". By the way, guys, not 5'4", as some of you have said. Still not the tallest. I used to boost my height. What can I say? I was presumably insecure. That's beside the point. The point is, if you're raising your heels off the floor, you're not allowing yourself to get into a deep squat. You're always in a shortened range of motion as you walk around, and when you get into a squat, you're cheating. It's easy to get your weight over your body. You're not fixing all of those movement patterns because you're not challenging yourself in that way. And it's the ankle flexion, the ankle dorsiflexion, that is the weak link for a lot of people. So train either barefoot around the house or using something like a minimal shoe. And that brings me to today's sponsor, Vivo Barefoot. Very proud, as always, to be sponsored by Vivo Barefoot. They're fantastic to work with, and they make what I think are the best barefoot shoes. Barefoot shoes, for those who aren't familiar with them yet, despite me talking about them all the time, are shoes with no heel or very minimal heel, meaning your foot is flat on the ground. They've got a wider toe box so you can splay your toes and use them to support yourself and to feel the ground underneath. And they've got a very thin sole, which improves proprioception, again allowing you to feel the contours of the floor. I can balance along a beam pretty well. I can do a pistol squat on a fence, but I wouldn't want to do that in a big regular shoe where I've got no sensation of the pole or the fence underneath my foot. And the same goes for sprinting on uneven terrain. I love barefoot shoes. I now wear them all the time And the great thing about Vivo Barefoot is they make shoes for every scenario. So whether you're going to the office, whether you're going to the gym, whether you're going on a hike, they make hiking shoes, all with these same principles and all extremely well made. They last for ages. They look great in my opinion. Like, I get loads of comments in person and on YouTube because they look great. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Vivo Barefoot and I highly recommend checking them out. And for a limited time only, you can use code BIONEER20 to get 20% off your first pair of Vivos. So there you go guys, that's how you can improve your ankle mobility and your squat depth with just a few minutes a day in a real gentle way that's not going to put your body under a lot of pressure. And more importantly, I hope that you take something away from this example that you can apply to any form of mobility stretch. That's to not push yourself too hard, an ego stretch, to consider not always using weighted stretching, although I think it can be really useful. I don't think it's useful in every scenario, to focus more on the mechanics and to stay relaxed when you're stretching, because being more relaxed is going to allow you to get into those positions and teach your body it's safe to do so. And finally, try moving around a bit in those positions if you want to further encourage the body to relax and build strength and control in those positions to prevent injury. Either way, I hope you found this useful. Let me know how you build your squat mobility in the comments down below. If you're interested in this kind of training that looks not only at the obvious stuff, building muscle, getting stronger on the key lifts, but also looks at things like mobility, endurance, speed, even cognitive performance, all the different aspects that make up a fitness profile, then you might enjoy my ebook and training program, Super Functional Training 2.0. I'll leave a link in the description down below. It comes with 85 plus pages of content and over 2 hours of instructional video. Either way, guys, thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.